You need to understand something that most people misunderstand about love, especially when it comes to someone who seems emotionally distant, someone who pulls away just when things begin to feel real, someone who appears warm one moment and completely unreachable the next. When you care deeply about a person like this, your natural instinct is to move closer. Your instinct is to explain yourself more clearly, to show more affection, to prove your loyalty again and again, hoping that eventually they will see how genuine your heart is. But the painful truth many people learn too late is that when someone is emotionally avoidant, pressure does not bring them closer. It often pushes them further away. For a long time, you might think the problem is that you have not loved them enough, or that maybe you have not shown them clearly how much they mean to you, so you become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. You start making excuses for the distance they create. When they disappear for a while, you tell yourself they are just busy or overwhelmed. When they respond with short messages or cold silence, you convince yourself they simply need space and time. Your heart begins carrying the responsibility for both people in the relationship, because deep down you believe that if you remain kind and loyal long enough, their walls will eventually fall. But you need to understand that emotional safety, not emotional pressure, is what truly softens a guarded heart. An avoidant person is not necessarily cold because they do not feel anything. Often they feel deeply, but their past experiences have taught them that closeness comes with risk. Somewhere along the way, they learned that vulnerability leads to disappointment, that emotional dependence leads to pain, that opening their heart means losing control. So when they begin to sense someone getting too close, their instinct is not to hold tighter. Their instinct is to create distance so they can breathe again. This is why chasing them rarely works. The more someone feels pursued when they are already uncomfortable with closeness, the more their mind begins searching for escape. It does not matter how kind your intentions are or how pure your love may be. To them, emotional intensity can feel like pressure rather than comfort. They begin to associate the relationship with stress instead of peace, and slowly they retreat further behind the walls they built to protect themselves. And that is where many beautiful hearts become exhausted. Because you were never trying to control anyone, you were simply trying to love them honestly. You were trying to create connection, trying to build something meaningful, trying to reach a person who sometimes felt just within your grasp and other times completely unreachable. That emotional roller coaster can make you question yourself. It can make you wonder whether you are too emotional, too demanding, too sensitive, even when your needs are completely reasonable. But here's the quiet truth that changes everything once you truly accept it. Real connection with an avoidant person does not begin when you chase them harder. It begins when you create emotional safety through calm presence rather than constant pursuit. Emotional safety means something very simple, yet very powerful. It means you stop trying to force someone to open up before they are ready. It means you stop filling every silence with explanations. Stop turning every moment of distance into a long conversation about feelings. Instead, you allow space to exist without panic. You show them that closeness with you does not come with emotional pressure or overwhelming expectations. This does not mean you silence your needs or pretend you do not care. It means you express your feelings honestly, but you do not demand immediate emotional responses that they may not yet be capable of giving. You allow the connection to breathe. You allow the relationship to grow naturally rather than pushing it forward with urgency. When someone with avoidant tendencies begins to feel that your presence is calm instead of demanding, something inside them starts to shift. They slowly realize that being close to you does not automatically mean losing their independence or being trapped in emotional intensity. They begin to experience your company as something peaceful rather than overwhelming. You might not see the change immediately. In fact, the change often happens quietly. At first, they may simply stay present a little longer. They may begin sharing small pieces of their thoughts that they once kept hidden. Conversations may start feeling more natural instead of tense. These moments may seem small, but they are significant because for someone who fears vulnerability, even a small step toward openness requires courage. But this process also requires strength from you, because creating emotional safety does not mean sacrificing your self-respect. It does not mean tolerating endless distance or accepting treatment that hurts your heart. Emotional safety is a balance between warmth and boundaries. You remain kind, patient, and genuine, but you also remain grounded in your own worth. You show them that your affection is real, but it is not desperate. Your presence is supportive, but it is not available at the cost of your dignity. When they pull away, you do not chase them with panic. You allow them the space they asked for while continuing to live your life with confidence and peace. And strangely enough, that calm strength is often what makes an avoidant person feel safer than anything else, because for the first time they are experiencing connection without chaos. They are seeing someone who cares deeply but does not try to control the rhythm of the relationship. Over time, that emotional safety can become something they trust. The walls they built around their heart do not collapse overnight, but they begin to open small doors. They begin to realize that closeness does not have to mean losing themselves. They begin to see that love can exist without pressure. And when that realization finally settles inside them, something beautiful happens. The person who once seemed distant starts moving closer on their own. Not because they were chased, not because they were convinced, but because they discovered that being near you feels peaceful instead of frightening. That is the quiet power of emotional safety. It does not force love to appear instantly, but it creates the environment where real connection can finally grow. You need to understand something that so many people never truly grasp about human relationships, especially when it comes to someone who pulls away, who retreats the moment things begin to feel too close, who seems emotionally unavailable even when you can see the softness beneath the surface. It is tempting in those moments to try harder, to chase harder, to bend over backward in the hope that your effort will be enough to break through the walls they have built around their heart. But what you need to understand is that devotion does not grow from desperation, and consistency does not come from pressure. True devotion, real lasting attachment, is created by consistency over time, by a quiet but unwavering presence, by a steady rhythm that says, I am here, I am available, I respect you, but I will not abandon myself for you. For so long, you might have thought that love meant intensity, that passion meant urgency, that showing your heart meant proving yourself every single day in big, dramatic gestures. So you gave endlessly. You stayed late on calls. You sent long paragraphs hoping that your words would reach them in a way your presence could not. You forgave too quickly, softened too much, and convinced yourself that your efforts were the glue holding the relationship together. And for a time, it worked, enough for them to stay near you without actually stepping fully into the connection. But consistency over time, not fleeting intensity, is what eventually shifts an avoidant heart from distant to devoted. They may respond to drama with withdrawal, but they cannot ignore the steady truth of someone who is reliably themselves, day after day, moment after moment, without changing who they are to fit a temporary need. Consistency is not about grand gestures. It is about showing up, even when the response is quiet or even when you feel unseen. It is about choosing to maintain your standards and your boundaries while offering warmth and respect, not because you are trying to earn anything, but because it is the expression of your own integrity. It is the difference between being emotionally reactive and being emotionally present. When someone has been used to chaos, inconsistency, or emotional ambivalence, the simple act of being reliable, predictable, and steadfast becomes revolutionary. They begin to realize, sometimes slowly and sometimes in a sudden quiet moment, that they can rely on you without fear, that closeness does not have to hurt, that affection can exist without conditions, and that your love is not a trap designed to force them to behave differently, but a safe harbor where they can begin to explore vulnerability at their own pace. And it is in that steady, calm, unwavering presence that the avoidant heart begins to feel something unfamiliar: trust. Trust that they can lean in without losing themselves. Trust that someone will not abandon them at the first sign of fear. Trust that love does not have to be a battlefield. It is the quiet repetition of showing up in a consistent way, of holding boundaries and still maintaining warmth, that slowly reshapes their nervous system. Their instinct to flee begins to soften because they realize that they can come closer without chaos. And every small step they take toward intimacy feels safer than it ever has before. You need to understand that this kind of consistency is not easy. It requires patience that is almost sacred, a patience that is rooted not in hope that they will change overnight, but in faith that the truth of your character matters more than any temporary frustration or distance. It requires you to resist the urge to chase, to correct, to argue for closeness when it is not being returned, and instead to trust that the pattern of your presence itself is teaching a lesson far deeper than any words could convey. And yes, it is tempting in those moments of absence, in those long silences and times when it feels like your care is invisible, to doubt yourself. You may feel small, invisible, unappreciated, and lonely, but that is part of the work of consistency. It stretches your heart. It teaches you to hold your love steady without needing validation in every moment. And it shows you that devotion is not measured by immediate reciprocation, but by the integrity with which you remain true to yourself. Consistency also creates a mirror for the avoidant person. When they see someone who does not bend their standards, who does not collapse under disappointment, who does not become frantic when distance appears, they begin to confront their own patterns. They begin to notice the contrast between the chaos they have caused and the calm you maintain. They begin to realize that the option of keeping you at a distance no longer guarantees their emotional comfort because you have made it clear that your presence is earned by mutual respect and engagement, not by their avoidance. And this, more than anything, ignites a shift. They begin to understand that closeness, when offered steadily and safely, does not suffocate but invites them into connection without fear. And here is the beautiful irony of it. The avoidant person often feels drawn not to someone who constantly chases, but to someone who can hold themselves with dignity, who maintains standards, who does not give their love in a frantic or reactive way. Your calm reliability becomes magnetic because it is not about forcing them to feel something, but about demonstrating through your consistent actions that love can exist without manipulation, drama, or instability. They start to feel devotion not because they were compelled by fear or guilt, but because they experienced something real, something steady, something that mirrors the way healthy attachment should feel. You need to understand that consistency over time does not just transform them, it transforms you. It teaches you the power of showing up for yourself, the beauty of honoring your own boundaries while remaining open-hearted, the incredible strength that comes from refusing to shrink your soul to accommodate someone else's fears. And in that space, something magical occurs. You are no longer defined by their distance. You are no longer at the mercy of their availability. You are no longer desperate for validation. And yet, ironically, their devotion begins to emerge naturally because they recognize that you are someone who cannot be taken for granted. Consistency, my friends, is the quiet force that shifts ice into warmth, that turns fear into trust, that allows someone who once seemed emotionally unavailable to step closer without feeling trapped. It is the steady heartbeat beneath the storm of uncertainty, the calm in the chaos of emotional unpredictability, the invisible thread that says, I am here, I care, I will not abandon myself, and I will not abandon you when you are ready to be present. And when you understand this, you realize that the power was never in chasing, pleading, or explaining. The power was always in being steady, in being consistent, in being unwaveringly yourself with boundaries that protect your heart while offering a safe space for someone else to meet you, not through pressure, not through desperation, but through the natural unfolding of trust, patience, and respect. This is the way devotion is born. This is the way walls begin to fall. This is the way ice begins to melt into warmth. And it is the kind of love that endures because it is built not on the highs and lows of reaction, but on the quiet, steady rhythm of authenticity and integrity. You need to understand something that most people never truly realize about human connection, especially when it comes to someone who has a tendency to pull away, someone whose heart seems guarded, someone who keeps a distance even when you feel that closeness is possible. It is natural to want to fill every silence, to chase every shadow, to explain yourself over and over in the hope that they will finally understand how deeply you care. You want to show them that love does not have to be frightening, that intimacy does not have to be dangerous, that connection can be safe, and in doing so you give pieces of yourself that you do not even realize you are surrendering. But you need to understand that the secret to unlocking someone who is avoidant does not lie in chasing them harder or proving yourself more. It lies in the art of emotional attunement, in creating a space where they feel seen, felt, and understood without pressure, without judgment, without expectation. For so long, you might have believed that showing love meant overwhelming them with your attention, with your words, with your actions, hoping that they would match your intensity and finally step forward. You may have stayed awake long after they went silent, imagining scenarios, replaying conversations, asking yourself if you did something wrong, if you were too much, if your love was simply not enough. And every time they withdrew, your instinct told you to lean harder, to reach further, to soften yourself more in order to close the gap they created. You needed them to feel your heart, to see your devotion, to understand that you were steady, loyal, and patient, even when they were afraid of the same closeness that terrified them. But here is the truth you need to understand. Avoidants are not meant to be fixed, and your efforts to change them are never what transforms them. What shifts their heart is the feeling of being genuinely understood, being allowed to exist as they are, being met without force, without judgment, without frantic insistence. Emotional attunement is the ability to feel what they feel without being consumed by it. It is the capacity to notice the walls they erect, the silences they fall into, the hesitations in their voice, and respond with calm presence rather than panic. It is the difference between chasing their fear and holding space for it, between interpreting their distance as rejection and recognizing it as a signal of vulnerability. And it is in that recognition that the quiet bridge to their heart begins to form. When you attune yourself emotionally, you create a space where they no longer feel threatened by closeness. They start to realize that with you, they can be themselves without fear of criticism or abandonment. They begin to understand that intimacy does not always mean losing control, that it is possible to come forward slowly, carefully, without the anxiety that has haunted them in past relationships. And every time you respond to their fear with patience instead of frustration, with presence instead of pressure, with understanding instead of judgment, you teach them that love is not a trap, that vulnerability can be safe, that connection can exist without chaos. This is why emotional attunement is so powerful. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it does not require constant explanations or grand declarations. It is quiet, almost invisible at first, like water wearing away stone, subtle but unrelenting. It asks you to resist the urge to fix them, to chase them, to perform for their attention. It asks you to notice their emotional state without letting it consume your own. It asks you to be steady when they are inconsistent, calm when they are reactive, and compassionate when they are distant. It is the most difficult form of love because it requires you to hold your own heart while simultaneously holding the space for another's. And it works in ways you cannot always see immediately. They may not respond at first. They may continue to pull back, to retreat, to test the boundaries you hold. They may wonder why you do not chase them, why you do not argue, why you do not plead. And in those moments, your quiet attunement is doing more than any words could ever do. It is showing them that love does not have to be frantic to be real, that devotion does not need to be earned by panic, that safety and patience are gifts that allow the heart to open on its own timeline. You need to understand that this kind of love is transformational, not because it forces someone to change, but because it teaches them that closeness can be gentle, that intimacy can be safe, that they do not have to flee to preserve themselves. Over time, this creates trust, the most potent and essential ingredient in turning an emotionally distant person into someone capable of devotion. When they feel understood and safe repeatedly, they begin to take small steps forward. They share a piece of themselves that they would normally keep hidden. They stay a little longer in your presence. They open a tiny door and then another, not because they were coerced, but because they finally believe it is okay to do so. And every time this happens, it strengthens your own heart too. You learn patience, resilience, and the deep power of being present without expectation. You discover that love is not a performance, that your value is not defined by someone else's ability to show affection, and that the most profound connections are created through understanding and care, not manipulation or intensity. You learn to trust yourself and trust the process. And in doing so, you become a mirror for their own growth, showing them that vulnerability is possible, safety is possible, and love can exist without fear. Eventually, the avoidant begins to respond, not in panic or obligation, but with real curiosity, real warmth, real interest. They start moving toward you in a way that feels voluntary, authentic, and enduring. They start to show devotion because they have discovered a space where their heart can be open without risk, where their feelings are acknowledged rather than dismissed, where connection does not demand that they give more than they are ready to give. This is the magic of emotional attunement. It transforms avoidance into presence, distance into closeness, fear into trust, and indifference into devotion. You need to understand that this is not about losing yourself. It is about holding yourself firmly while inviting another to meet you without pressure. It is about creating a bridge that is steady, calm, and strong, capable of carrying someone across the gap that fear has built, and in doing so, it creates something extraordinary. A bond that is real, lasting, and rooted in trust. A bond where the avoidant heart begins to open not because they are forced to, but because they feel safe enough to do so. And that safety, nurtured over time, becomes the foundation for devotion.